Carl Jung discovered that burnout isn't what you think it is. After studying hundreds of patients who experienced complete exhaustion, Jung found that 80% weren't actually tired from overwork. They were exhausted from living lives that had nothing to do with who they really were. Jung called this soul fatigue the moment when your psyche withdraws its energy because it can no longer support the direction your life has taken. You thought burnout meant you were working too hard, that you needed better boundaries, more rest, a longer vacation. But Jung discovered something that transforms everything we know about exhaustion. Your fatigue isn't a problem with your schedule. It's a message from the deepest part of yourself, telling you that something fundamental has gone wrong. Right now, you might be waking up heavy, dragging yourself through days that used to excite you. You tell yourself you're lazy, unmotivated, maybe even broken. But beneath that fatigue is something your conscious mind doesn't want to hear, a truth your soul has been whispering for months, maybe years. Here's what's at stake. Everything you thought you knew about success, productivity, and living a meaningful life. You've been told that burnout is a time management problem, that you just need to work smarter or take better care of yourself. But Jung's research revealed something startling. Burnout isn't about doing too much, it's about being too little of who you actually are. Jung found that burnout forces you into what he called the confrontation with the self, the moment when your ego's agenda collides with your soul's truth. You're stuck in psychological rebellion. Your body won't cooperate because your deeper nature is calling a strike. Too exhausted to keep performing, but not yet clear about what comes next. The cost of not understanding this process is devastating. Most people think they just need to push through, rest up, or change jobs. But Jung warned against the most common mistake, treating burnout as a productivity problem when it's actually an authenticity crisis is like putting a bandage on a bullet wound. You'll either force yourself back into the life that depleted you, or you'll remain paralyzed in exhaustion, never understanding what your soul is trying to tell you. Jung discovered there's a third option. Learning to read burnout as a language, understanding what your psyche is rejecting, and discovering how to rebuild your life from the inside out. Let me tell you about the patient who made Carl Jung realize that burnout could be more psychologically significant than any amount of rest could fix. His name was Wilhelm, and he came to Jung's practice in 1928 after what he described as a complete collapse. Wilhelm was a respected physician in Zurich, 43 years old, married with 2 children, admired by his colleagues. From the outside, his life looked exemplary. But Wilhelm told Jung something that confused even him. I can't get out of bed in the morning, not because I'm sad or afraid. I simply have no energy. It's as if someone has drained all the fuel from my tank. Medical examinations found nothing wrong. Wilhelm wasn't anemic. His thyroid functioned normally. He had no underlying illness. Yet he described his body as feeling filled with concrete. He had stopped seeing patients, stopped reading medical journals, even stopped engaging with his own children. I thought I loved medicine, Wilhelm told Jung. But now when I try to care about my patients' problems, I feel nothing. Just this profound indifference, like I'm watching my life from behind thick glass. Jung recognized something that most doctors at the time missed. Wilhelm wasn't experiencing medical exhaustion. He was experiencing what Jung called psychic energy withdrawal, when the unconscious stops fueling activities that don't align with the self. Through their sessions, Jung discovered something startling. Wilhelm had never wanted to be a doctor. His father had been a physician, his grandfather before that. At 19, Wilhelm had dreamed of studying philosophy and literature. But his father had told him, philosophy doesn't feed a family. Medicine is a noble calling. Wilhelm had buried that dream so deeply he'd forgotten it existed. He had become an excellent doctor, successful by every external measure. But Jung recognized the pattern he'd seen in hundreds of cases. For 25 years, Wilhelm had been living someone else's life. His soul had been starving while his ego performed brilliantly. Your exhaustion, Jung told him, isn't from doing too much. It's from doing the wrong things for too long. Your psyche is withdrawing its cooperation because it can no longer sustain this false direction. Wilhelm stared at Jung, and for the first time in months, tears came. Not tears of sadness, tears of recognition. Something inside him had been screaming, and he'd been calling it laziness. Jung spent months with Wilhelm, not trying to restore his energy for medicine, but helping him understand that his burnout was actually his soul's refusal to participate in a lie anymore. Through their work together, Jung developed what he called the authenticity crisis framework, a specific understanding of how burnout reveals the gap between who you're pretending to be and who you actually are. This discovery revolutionized Jung's understanding of exhaustion. He realized that most people who experience profound burnout aren't weak or lazy. They're unconsciously rebelling against lives that have become too small, inauthentic, or disconnected from their essential nature. But Jung found something remarkable in his research. Those who learned to read their burnout as communication rather than failure emerged with lives so aligned with their authentic selves that exhaustion became almost impossible. They found energy they didn't know they had because they were finally spending it on what actually mattered to their souls. After working with hundreds of burned out patients, Carl Jung made a discovery that challenged everything he thought he knew about human energy. The very process that depletes your false energy is the same process that reveals your authentic energy. Jung called this the energy paradox. You must run empty on the wrong fuel before you can fill up on the right fuel. But here's where most people get stuck. They think losing energy means they need more rest, when actually it means they need more truth. Jung discovered that all human energy falls into two categories: persona energy and self-energy. Persona energy comes from your false self, the identity you constructed to gain approval, avoid rejection, and meet external expectations. Career ambitions adopted from family pressure, relationship patterns learned from social conditioning, achievement goals that were never actually yours. Persona energy is borrowed energy. It's fueled by fear, obligation, and the need to maintain an image. Self-energy comes from your authentic core, the part of you that exists before social conditioning, beyond other people's expectation. This energy doesn't depend on external validation because it emerges from internal alignment. Self-energy is owned energy. It's fueled by genuine interest, authentic values, and soul-level resonance. Jung uncovered a paradox. Burnout destroys persona energy before self-energy becomes available. You're left in a gap where the old fuel is completely gone, but the new fuel hasn't emerged yet. Jung found that this gap could last anywhere from months to years, depending on how deeply you understand what's happening and how consciously you navigate the transition. Most people panic during this phase and try to artificially restart their persona energy. More coffee, more discipline, more pushing through. But Jung discovered something crucial. This was like trying to reanimate something that needs to die. The exhaustion is intentional. Your psyche is refusing to fuel the performance anymore. But Jung discovered something remarkable about patients who learned to wait consciously in the emptiness. They began to notice subtle impulses that felt completely different from their old motivations. These weren't driven by shoulds or have to. They emerged from what Jung called soul-calling, authentic desires from the deepest part of their being. Anna, one of Jung's patients, described it perfectly. I used to force myself to care about my legal career through sheer willpower and anxiety about money. When that energy died after my burnout, I thought I was finished. But slowly, I started noticing different impulses. I wanted to work with my hands to create something tangible, not to impress anyone, but because the idea of building furniture made me feel alive in a way arguing cases never did. Jung realized that self-energy doesn't feel like traditional motivation at all. It doesn't push or demand or exhaust. It pulls, invites, energizes. It feels less like I should and more like I'm drawn to. It's sustainable because it comes from alignment, not performance. But here's what Jung found most fascinating. You can't force this new motivation to appear. You can't think your way to authentic purpose. You can only create the psychological conditions for it to emerge naturally. And that starts with accepting that your old energy had to die. Now I'm going to reveal Carl Jung's most powerful insight about burnout, the realization that completely transformed how he understood why high achievers collapse. Jung discovered that what most people call ambition is actually sophisticated fear management. Your career goals, productivity, habits, achievement patterns. Jung found that 85% of driven behavior is unconscious attempts to avoid feeling inadequate, unworthy, or insignificant. During his research, Jung documented a disturbing pattern. People would spend decades pursuing goals they believed were meaningful, only to achieve them and feel completely hollow. This wasn't ingratitude or depression. It was the inevitable result of chasing purposes that never belonged to them in the first place. Jung called this achievement addiction when you mistake ego validation for soul fulfillment. You think you want success, recognition, or accomplishment, but what you actually want is to feel worthy, safe, or loved. The problem is that external achievements can never fill internal voids. They can only distract from them temporarily. This is why burnout hits high achievers so devastatingly. When you finally succeed at everything you thought you wanted and still feel empty, your psyche realizes the entire game was rigged from the start. Every goal you've been chasing suddenly looks like an elaborate distraction from the real question: who am I when I'm not performing? Margaretti's case perfectly illustrated this dynamic. Margaretti had spent 18 years building a successful publishing house, thinking she was motivated by love of literature and business. But after a complete burnout that left her bedridden for months, Margaretti couldn't summon any interest in her company. "I built this business because I was terrified of being ordinary," Margaretti told Jung. "Every book we published, every expansion, every award, it was all driven by the fear that if I stopped achieving, I would stop mattering. Now that I can see this clearly, the whole enterprise feels like an elaborate monument to my insecurities." Jung helped Margaretti understand that her burnout wasn't a business problem. It was a liberation. Margaretti was finally free from the unconscious fears that had been puppeteering her life decisions for 2 decades. But Jung discovered something crucial in every case he studied. You can't just strip away false ambitions without replacing them with authentic purposes. The psyche abhors meaninglessness. If you don't consciously cultivate genuine direction, you'll either relapse into achievement addiction or remain paralyzed in purposelessness. Jung developed what he called the shadow wound protocol, a systematic method for excavating the childhood moment when your worth became conditional, when you learned that being yourself wasn't enough. The process begins with what Jung called origin tracking, identifying the exact moment when achievement became synonymous with lovability. For Wilhelm, it was his father's disappointment when he mentioned philosophy. For Margaret, it was being ignored by her parents unless she brought home perfect grades. For Anna, it was watching her mother praise her brother's accomplishments while dismissing her artistic interests. Jung found a universal pattern beneath every burnout case. Beneath every case of severe burnout was a wounded child who learned too early that love must be earned through performance. The adult achiever is just that terrified child, now with a career and a mortgage, still trying to prove they deserve to exist. Burnout is the moment that child finally collapses from exhaustion. After years of research on burnout and recovery, Carl Jung developed a precise 3-stage framework for transforming soul fatigue into authentic vitality. Jung called this the return to self process, a systematic approach to rebuilding your life from the inside out. Stage 1, conscious surrender. Jung discovered that most people resist their burnout, which prolongs their suffering unnecessarily. The first stage involves consciously cooperating with the collapse instead of fighting it. Jung developed a technique called sacred stopping, deliberately ceasing all attempts to push through, fix yourself, or return to productivity. This isn't depression, or giving up, it's creating psychological space for truth to emerge. This involves what Jung called the descent practice, spending time each day simply sitting with your exhaustion without trying to solve it. You ask, what is this fatigue trying to tell me? Then you wait for answers without editing or judging what arises. One patient wrote in his journal, I am allowing myself to feel completely empty. For the first time in my adult life, I'm not trying to fix, improve, or achieve anything. I'm just here. And beneath the terror of this stillness, something is breathing. Jung found that conscious surrender accelerates the transformation process and prevents the complications that arise when people try to artificially maintain dead ambitions. The exhaustion isn't the enemy, it's the teacher. Most people resist their collapse, which only prolongs the suffering. Jung discovered that the ones who surrender consciously often emerge months faster than those who fight it. Stage 2. Active imagination. Once you've consciously stopped performing, Jung's second stage involves using active imagination to dialogue with your authentic self, the part of you that exists beneath all the conditioning. This isn't visualization or manifestation. It's a specific technique for listening to unconscious wisdom. Jung instructed patients to sit quietly and ask, what wants to live through me that I haven't been allowing? Then wait for images, words, or feelings to arise spontaneously. The key is receiving what emerges without immediately judging its practicality. Wilhelm began receiving images of himself, teaching young students in small classrooms, discussing philosophy and meaning. At first, he dismissed this as fantasy. He was a doctor, not a teacher. But Jung encouraged him to follow the impulse without needing to understand it rationally. Within months, Wilhelm was volunteering at a local school, leading discussion groups on ethics and philosophy. He described feeling more energized after 2 hours with students than he'd felt after years of medical practice. The energy wasn't driven by achievement or approval. It emerged from what Jung called soul recognition, finally doing something that matched his essential nature. Jung observed that this new energy didn't require willpower or discipline. It flowed naturally because it was aligned with who Wilhelm actually was. Stage 3. Authentic reconstruction. Jung's final stage involves rebuilding your external life to match your internal truth. This doesn't mean quitting your job impulsively or making dramatic changes out of reaction. It means making strategic micro-alignments, small choices that honor your authentic self over your performing persona. Jung called this life redesign by soul consensus. Instead of asking, what should I do? You ask, what feels alive? Instead of, what will others think? You ask, what resonates with my deepest nature? For Wilhelm, this meant transitioning from full-time medicine to part-time practice while developing a philosophy curriculum for young adults. For Margaretti, it meant selling her publishing house and becoming a literary mentor for aspiring writers, same field, completely different energy. For Anna, it meant leaving law entirely to open a custom furniture workshop. Jung found that people living from authentic reconstruction often accomplish more than they did during their burnout phase, but with completely different energy. They work from overflow rather than depletion. Their efforts sustain them rather than drain them. The key insight Jung discovered is that authentic energy doesn't feel like forcing at all. It feels like following your natural inclinations, like water finding its course. There's still effort involved, but it's joyful effort because it aligns with who you actually are. Jung warned that this process can't be rushed. The psyche has its own timing for resurrection, and trying to accelerate it often creates what he called false recovery, pretending to be energized when you're actually still in the collapse phase, which only leads to deeper burnout later. But Jung promised that those who navigate this process consciously emerge with unshakable vitality that external circumstances can't destroy, because it flows from the indestructible core of their authentic being. Here's Carl Jung's most profound discovery about burnout recovery, the insight that will completely transform how you understand energy, purpose, and sustainable living. Jung found that the exhaustion you're experiencing isn't the absence of energy, it's the presence of energy so authentic that your false self can't access it. Your burnout isn't depletion, it's redirection. Jung called this soul energy vitality that emerges from authentic alignment rather than external achievement. And here's what makes this revolutionary. Soul energy feels completely different from achievement energy. Most people miss it because they're looking for the wrong signals. Achievement energy feels urgent, driven, anxious. It carries a sense of, I have to do this or I'll fail. It's fueled by fear, obligation, or external pressure. You feel it in your head as mental force and in your body as tension. It depletes over time because it's borrowed from your future self. Soul energy feels calm, magnetic, sustainable. It carries a sense of, I get to do this because it's who I am. It's fueled by authentic interest, deep values, and natural resonance. You feel it in your chest as warmth and in your body as aliveness. It replenishes over time because it flows from your essential nature. Stefan's transformation showed this distinction clearly. Before his burnout, Stefan was motivated to build his architecture firm through anxiety about proving himself to his father and maintaining his lifestyle. After burnout, that entire energy system collapsed, leaving him feeling directionless for over a year. But slowly, Stefan began noticing a different kind of impulse. He felt drawn to design affordable housing for low-income families, something that offered no prestige or profit. Just the work itself called to him. It doesn't feel like ambition, Stefan told Jung. It feels like remembering something essential about who I am. When I'm designing homes for families who've been displaced, I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm just expressing what matters to me at the deepest level. Jung realized that Stefan had discovered what he called ontological energy, energy that emerges from being rather than achieving. Instead of being driven by what he lacked, Stefan was inspired by what he was. This led Jung to a startling conclusion. Most people never experience authentic energy because they're too busy forcing achievement energy to notice soul energy trying to emerge. Burnout isn't a crisis. It's an invitation to finally feel the difference. But Jung discovered that soul energy operates according to completely different principles than achievement energy. Soul energy is rhythmic. It comes in natural cycles rather than constant availability. Jung found that trying to force constant productivity with soul energy leads to burnout all over again. You must learn to honor your natural rhythms. Soul energy is selective. It flows toward what genuinely matters to you and away from what doesn't, regardless of external reward. This means you might have tremendous energy for activities that pay nothing and zero energy for activities that pay well. Soul energy is mysterious. You often don't understand why something energizes you until after you commit to it. Jung encouraged patients to trust attraction over logic when rebuilding their lives. Soul energy is sustainable. Because it emerges from your authentic nature rather than compensation for wounds, it doesn't deplete. People living from soul energy often work longer hours than before, but feel energized rather than exhausted. Jung's breakthrough insight was that the transition from achievement energy to soul energy requires what he called productive emptiness, a period where you consciously abstain from forcing any agenda while learning to sense subtler guidance from your authentic self. This is why burnout is so crucial. It's your psyche's way of clearing space for real energy to emerge. If you fill that space too quickly with new goals and obligations, you miss the opportunity to discover what Jung called the life your soul is trying to live through you. Number, living from authentic vitality. After decades of research on burnout and transformation, Carl Jung made a final discovery that revolutionized his understanding of human energy. When you learn to live from soul energy, you don't just recover from burnout. You access a form of vitality so powerful and sustainable that it transforms everything you touch. Jung called this integrated living when your external choices finally match your internal truth. This isn't about finding balance or managing stress better. It's about becoming so aligned with your authentic nature that exhaustion becomes almost impossible, because you're no longer fighting yourself. Jung observed that people living from soul vitality share specific characteristics that distinguish them from those operating on achievement energy. They work from resonance, not obligation. Instead of forcing themselves to care about goals, they naturally gravitate toward what genuinely matters to them. Their work feels like expression rather than performance. They respond to inner signals, not outer demands. Instead of organizing their lives around external expectations, they become highly attuned to what energizes versus depletes them. They develop what Jung called somatic wisdom, trusting their body's signals about what's aligned. They serve authentic values without self-sacrifice. Their work benefits others not through martyrdom but through genuine expression. They've learned that serving their own soul's purpose automatically serves something larger. Helena embodied this shift perfectly. Before her burnout, Helena was a corporate trainer driven by financial security and professional recognition. After 18 months of complete exhaustion and soul-searching, she lost all interest in corporate work. But gradually, Helena began noticing impulses to work with trauma survivors, something she'd never considered. She started volunteering at a women's shelter, facilitating support group. The work was emotionally heavy. Yet, Helena described feeling more energized after 3 hours at the shelter than she'd felt during years of corporate training. "I'm not trying to build anything or achieve anything," Helena told Jung. "I'm just being who I am, someone who understands pain and wants to help others through it. The impact happens naturally because I'm finally doing work that matches my soul." Jung discovered that this is how soul vitality operates. It serves others through authentic being rather than strategic doing. When you're aligned with your essential nature, your mere presence becomes healing to others. Living from soul vitality requires tremendous courage because it often leads you away from conventional success. You might earn less money, receive less recognition, or face criticism from people who don't understand your choices. Jung called this the sacrifice of the golden persona, releasing attachment to external validation in favor of internal integrity. It's not always comfortable, but Jung found it's always sustainable because it emerges from the inexhaustible source of who you actually are. The ultimate goal isn't to prevent burnout, but to become so honest with yourself that soul fatigue becomes impossible. When this happens, Jung discovered energy becomes natural because you're no longer swimming against the current of your own nature. You're not trying to motivate yourself to live authentically. You're allowing authentic living to energize you. Your fatigue isn't weakness, it's wisdom trying to get your attention. Here's Carl Jung's ultimate insight about burnout. The exhaustion you're experiencing isn't the absence of vitality. It's the presence of truth your ego has been avoiding. Your fatigue isn't weakness, it's wisdom trying to get your attention. Your old energy had to die because it was keeping you from discovering what Jung called the life your soul is trying to live. The emptiness you're in isn't actually empty. It's pregnant with possibilities that can only emerge when you stop trying to fill it with the same patterns that depleted you. Jung discovered that soul vitality doesn't feel like achievement energy at all. It feels like finally exhaling after holding your breath for years. It's sustainable because it comes from alignment, not compensation. Your burnout didn't break you, it freed you. Your assignment is to practice what Jung called conscious listening. Instead of trying to force energy back or push through exhaustion, spend time each day asking, what is my fatigue trying to tell me? Then sit with whatever arises without immediately trying to fix it or make it practical. Notice what genuinely energizes you versus what you think should energize you. Pay attention to the subtle difference between I should and I'm drawn to. Trust that your soul knows what it needs, even when your mind doesn't understand the process yet. Remember, Jung discovered that authentic vitality can't be manufactured. It can only be uncovered. You're not broken for being exhausted. You're being prepared for energy so real and sustainable that it will transform not just your life, but everyone your life touches. Your exhaustion isn't random. Your collapse wasn't weakness. Your fatigue isn't your enemy. It's your soul crying out for recognition, alignment, and truth. The question is, are you ready to answer that call? Comment, I hear my soul's call. if this message resonates with you. Let's build a community of people who understand that burnout isn't failure, it's your psyche demanding authenticity. Subscribe for more insights into Jung's discoveries about living from your essential nature instead of your conditioning. And if you're ready to explore how psychological trauma can trigger a profound rebirth, my next video reveals Jung's framework for what he called the twice-born psyche, a complete psychological death and rebirth that creates what Jung believed was psychological immunity. The video explores shadow integration, ego death, and how Jung understood trauma as a catalyst for transformation. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.